My guest today is Jack P Flaherty. After spending more than 20 years consulting and risk management for firms such as Deloitte and PwC, he recognized that often our issues and failures were rooted in poor or ill-informed decisions. In today's episode, we talked to Jack about his book, The Decision Switch. He realized that our success depends on having the necessary knowledge. He developed the 7 principles of successful decision-making, a proven framework he created to empower individuals to consistently achieve their goals. Welcome to Lifeology.
Thank you very much for having me on today. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yes. I was looking at this information. So there's a 7-step process. I know for many people, they're like, 7 steps. I just make a decision. How did you develop this concept of the 7 principles for decision making?
It was observing both myself, but my clients and just looking at other individuals. And yes, the actual decision itself is a point in time, but there's so many activities that happen before and after that influence our outcomes. Whether, collaborating with others or, following through on decisions we've made to make sure that people actually, follow through on their commitments. And so it was important to me to really elaborate that for folks so they can achieve the success they really deserve.
Now, when it comes to decision making, as a layperson or just someone in everyday life, sometimes I'm a layperson when I do something that's not in my field. Are these principles still relatable to quote everyday life?
Oh, absolutely. The fundamental principles, I frame them in the structure of the corporate world as I really want to empower that next generation of leaders. But the same principles we can apply to our own lives in being able to evaluate a situation, making sure that we've got all the information and talking to different people about what the implications are, the opportunities. But also the most critical aspect is the last principle, self-reflection. Evaluating, did we accomplish our goals? And if we didn't, are there opportunities for us to improve how we executed on that? So the next time we do it, we don't repeat the same failures. And as a result, I put together the 7 principles so we can consistently get great results to drive future success.
Now, I was reading some information. So I usually don't timestamp my interviews as because people watch it again in the future. But I did read something about in the Harvard Business Review, it was talking about making decisions during chaos. Tell us more about that.
So a huge driver for that, for all of us in our personal and professional lives, is this wave of technology and how it's disrupting our lives and reflecting on whether our careers, our personal lives, and how we do our work. And so many folks are unfamiliar with what these technologies are, let alone what they do and how it's shifting the landscape. You and I are both speaking right now from home. 10 years ago, that would have never happened in this forum. And so that is the chaos that we're talking about. It's not a negative thing, negative connotation, but if we don't properly evaluate all these different stimuli and changes to the world, we're going to be set and maybe left behind because we didn't take the opportunity to really evaluate what's going on and apply to our lives or professional lives to, again, achieve the success that we deserve and we've set ourselves up for.
So let's use this particular concept as far as the AI, the technology type of thing.
Sure.
So we don't know what we don't know. So people will make decisions based on the information they have now. And of course, retrospectively, let's say a year from now, they're like, we shouldn't have done that. So using your 7 principles, let's talk specifically about that because everyone can relate with technology. Let's talk about the 7 principles of currently today using the AI technology for how it's beneficial and how it may not be beneficial. So walk us maybe through some of those steps, your principles.
Absolutely. The first principle is to triage first. And this means do a landscape assessment, both of ourselves, but our industry or whatever situation we're in, and what factors are at play. I have a couple close friends who are screenwriters. We had a very tension-based debate about the writer's strike and what's going on. And one of them was really pushing, we want more writers in the writer's room. And I took a pause and I tried to put it in empathetic terms.
Sure.
But change is afoot. And if we don't acknowledge that and incorporate that into our plan forward, again, we're going to leave ourselves, as dinosaurs and not be able to, really harness the potential of these technologies. And because AI does a tremendous job of generating content, but the great thing that we cannot forget is that you still need the human element to shape that. So it speeds up the process, but we still need that critical thinking at the end of it. And whether it's going further down with collaboration and working with others, all these technologies speed up the pace of business, speed up the pace of our lives. And by taking a strong and deep understanding of what those are, we can set ourselves up for success and having the confidence that we're positioned ourselves for that.
I was thinking specifically about a lot of different artisans. I was speaking with a friend of mine who said that his family comes from a long line of shoemakers or cobblers, and I was like, well, that's great. But in my mind, I'm thinking that's very passe. But there is an aspect of the artisan component of someone who can truly craft a shoe, if you will, versus maybe more of the technology today. So I think a lot of it has to do with what one's perception is as far as quality. Now, when we look at from a production standpoint, obviously more quantity for many different companies is greater than the quality of that because they can turn over in their volume
Sure.
as far as their sales as well. So is it dependent upon what a person wants or is it dependent upon what the community or from a consumer, what a consumer wants?
There's been tremendous leaps. My wife, she's in the fashion industry, and we're even seeing it there, where you brought up the concept of shoes, and there's new platforms out there that will take full-scale body images and provide customized clothing based on that, so you don't have to go to a store. So it's actually many of the concept that I have in my mind, that Italian cobbler that I went to in my early 20s and would shape a shoe perfectly for my foot. And the labor that took obviously was significant, thereby the price. Well, now with technology, we can do the same type of approach, but get and get the same results, but in a shorter amount of time. And the level of precision, I think, has only gone up. So yes, there's great opportunity in the creative world, but again, we still need humans at the end of the day to provide that quality control to make sure that the final design, the output, really meets the consumer's wants, needs, and they've got a great appreciation of that.
Now, you talk about triaging. So from the medical world, triaging means you assess something very quickly and decide what you need to do. So the triaging is one of the first principles. Now, when it comes to having certain people be at the table to triage to see what to do, what principle is that where it has more of the collaborative aspect of it?
So collaboration with others is the idea that so often heroes don't wind up getting the credit they deserve. And the reason being is if we don't bring others along and get them bought in, we don't get that continued support. And we're not all alone. Whatever jobs we have, whatever lives we have, there's other people that play critical roles in that. So by gaining their perspective, getting their support, it's not just the energy that you produce behind a decision, but you get others in a group effort. And so, on one hand, it's creating the most well-rounded and positive decision. But on the back half of that is the additional support energy you have to really push that through to get it across the finish line. And that's why collaboration is so important in really listening and in bringing others in.
Now, as a leader, so let's say I'm the quote leader of my house, and I say that in quotations because everyone's that very different for every family. Then there's also, the leader in a corporation or an industry. There'd be different levels of leadership. How does a leader specifically know their role and understand that other people have different roles, which are just as important? How do they make sure that everyone is aware of their role and how everyone has a quote voice at the table?
Oh, great question. Before actually the 7 principles, I put a contextual chapter in the book that talks about defining your role. And that's whether it's an organization, a household, whatever that matter is. And there's twofold. One is, we get the right persons who are at the table that contribute valuable input for that. But the other is it's efficiency. Because frequently we find individuals that will participate in the decision, so expending effort that's not necessary. Or on the worst side, the negative side, is somebody doesn't actually follow through and participate because they don't know the role. And I think this is what really contributes to a culture of collaboration, is by when everyone knows what the role is, you don't have to think and question whether or not Bob or Sally's going to do their job. You know they're going to do their job, and so you're going to pick up the proverbial baton and carry that forward. So it really cultivates more trusting relationships more efficiencies within an organization, but it just gives you more confidence because I can own this space. And I just think for us, as from a mental perspective, it's such a much more positive mindset for us to approach decisions, approach life.
Now, this is slightly outside of the purview of the decision making, but it's part of it as well. So if I'm, let's say, a cog in the wheel in the decision making process, I'm not the leader of this, and I give my information, I give what I think is really applicable, and I'm confident this is what it is, and then the leader doesn't necessarily use my information. How does that impact a person that's involved in the decision making but doesn't have the final say? How does that impact the whole process overall?
Sure. So yes, whenever there's a complex decision, there's lots of ideas that get thrown in, and people do get sometimes alienated or frustrated when it's not their idea that winds up getting used. Mm-hmm. And this is why the communication component of this and collaboration and empathy are so important. Because if I didn't choose your recommendation, your decision, but by coming to you and saying, here's where the pros and the cons were, you feel that you were understood and that you participate in the process. Okay. And that's so important for this. So it's not just a matter of just having a bucket to throw things into, but it's by mindfully acknowledging those that you get, again, that collaborative support for and push behind it. Because so often I've seen where somebody has made a suggestion, and then because it didn't go their way, they just cut off and remove themselves.
Mm. Yeah, and that's a personal situation that everyone has to deal with, because however they internalize what the response was is something they can deal with on a separate basis. Or that's a different show. But I do want to say this though. So if as a leader, I get all this information, so I get it from you, from all these people, I have to make the decision since I'm I have to sign off on this. How do you know when you have enough information to make a decision?
Again, another great question, great prompt. There's never going to be a 100% that you have every aspect of information. Mm-hmm. But there's the notion of, have I inquired with all the critical stakeholders? Have I looked at the available documentation and properly evaluating that, not just going with a gut reaction or a knee-jerk response? And many times it's important to accumulate that and actually give that to your stakeholders before they're actually giving you feedback. So everybody comes to a well-informed conclusion. So I can't assure anyone that they'll ever have 100% of the information, but it's by making sure that you collect as much as possible within the allotted time frame. Because if you're somebody like an air traffic controller, you need to make a decision within seconds. But if you are making a large decision like purchasing a house, there's more lead time with that. And so depending on the situation, you need to evaluate the urgency and how much you will pursue that additional information.
Now, when it comes to making decisions, so if I have all the information, and so if I'm thinking, okay, well, this is going to affect my family or my company for the next 5 years. But if I really think about it, I'm like, well, wait a minute, 5 years, that's a lot can change in 5 years. What happens if 6 years, all of a sudden the decision I make that affect me for 5 years, it impacts what's going to happen in 6 years? How does one have the confidence in the decision-making process to know that they are doing what's healthiest for their company or their family within a projected amount of time that they have?
Oh, okay. Yes. I think a very important question. This is all about the planning process and trying to identify what that future looks like. And based on the information that you have today, you make the best decision. But again, with decision-making being a process, it's recognizing that the landscape may change. I mean, your relationships with someone may change. Mm-hmm. Technology may change. The consumer market and their appetite may change. And so when you are brought with new information, you're then able to pivot and then course correct to make sure that you're still going towards your objective, your goal. And that's why I really emphasize the whole notion of having a North Star. Because as we weave along, things will happen. Obstructions will come up. And how do we navigate around those is the most critical point of that as you establish your path and you course correct based on, as you mentioned, changes or shifts that happen in that 5-year period.
I really like how you say that, because there are times when, we think we make a decision and that we can't repeal that decision, or we can't make another decision like a week later because we have new information as well. Not to focus specifically on the CEOs of these companies, but I know there's a couple different companies that have made some decisions that maybe not have gone the way they wanted, like Ocean's Gate and SpaceX. Can we talk specifically about the decision making that happened with either one of those, and how maybe where some of the breakdown went? Once again, nothing against those companies, but unfortunately, we all have life lessons to learn and life lessons to teach. Can you speak more on that, please?
Yeah, and I'll start with Ocean Gate. It's no doubt about it. It's a tragedy. However, there was a couple of articles that came out several weeks after the tragedy did happen. And one of the things that was uncovered was that many of the checks and balances were bypassed. The CEO was known for being very autocratic. And so he had a vision for where he wanted to go. He had symbolic dates that were set up, and he was determined to meet those at all costs. And so that's a scenario where you start making decisions based on a symbolic date, but you start putting up blinders to whether it's feedback from experts, people who have observed it firsthand, and quite frankly, regulations and controls of the U.S. government, because that's the reason why they were launching their submersibles in international waters, so they didn't have to comply with certain safety and risk regulations.
Yeah. Keep going.
Sorry.
If my screen's blank, keep going.
No, you're fine. No, the other. Sorry, pause. I was reading the second example. As for the second example, when you're talking about, as for the second example, when you're talking about SpaceX, this is an organization that's doing brilliant things. But I read in the Wall Street Journal several weeks ago where the rocket that exploded last April destroyed about 400 acres of both commercial as well as national park grounds. And one of the critical reasons why that happened was they decided to not use the industry standard shields that would have mitigated much of that damage. And as the article alluded, it was Elon Musk's personal decision to not implement those particular protective shields. And so, as a result, this is why it's so important to collaborate and gather information from those experts. So we're making the best decisions that we can at the time with the information that we have available. And we can minimize, for better words, the harm that we have on ourselves, the environment, whatever the situation is. And so I really emphasize coming back to the collaboration, information gathering is so critical, when we look at these types of scenarios.
As you're talking, it makes me think of, so I have the people on my team and we're talking about this, but there's so many nuances and so many aspects of unknowns. So how do you know, or how do you gather as many people to collaborate with? So for example, if I'm making for the situation with Elon Musk, obviously nothing against him, but we're just talking about the event. With that, if he brought in like 20 people, arbitrary number, but there should have been at least 50 people part of that. How do you know as a leader when to continue to have more collaboration or more input in that? Because we do have a decision that has to be made, but how do you find out how many of the, what's the word I'm looking for? How do you know that what processes can you put in place to be able to have as many people be a part of the collaboration process as opposed to just the few that you think you have or know?
Sure. There's no finite number, and it's situation dependent. And when talking about, in this case, and Elon's brilliant. I mean, there's obviously there's no question about that. But if there's specific domains where we're talking about, aeronautics or safety or materials or metals, bringing in those types of individuals, there's typically a pretty standard approach of who the experts are in those fields that should contribute for that. Could there be an unknown that does pop up? Obviously there is. I think that's the nature of life. Change, surprises happen. So that's why we need to lay the best plan forward that we can. Mm-hmm. And in those situations, whether it be Silicon Valley Bank and making sure that you've got the right investment advice, in the case of SpaceX, making sure that you got the right aeronautical engineers and experts, it's really identifying what those risks are or those questions are, and bringing those folks to the table. That makes it so powerful to bring in others to help you make that decision. Because yes, he might have been the ultimate decision maker, but did he have all the information that he needed to make the most well-informed decision?
One last thing I'll ask here as we wrap up, but from the layperson standpoint. So in my family, I'm making a decision. And so in that, I've asked everybody as well. And when the decision is that I would make as quote leader of the family, and it impacts my family in a different way, or in other words, they're not happy with it. How does a leader the decision you make affect the culture? I mean, it does affect the culture, but as a leader, how do you then help mitigate the culture so that no one is demoralized and that they can all be back on the same page of what the vision is?
Empathy is so critical. And as we go down that path of decision-making and communication, it's by sitting down with those individuals, characterizing and painting a picture of what our plans are, what our futures, what our North Stars that we're looking to achieve. And yes, there's negative consequences. If based on your job, you have to move locations, there's a negative impact on your children. And so walking them through why we're doing this, but also what the opportunities are that it presents for them as well. So paint the picture of, both reality, yes, acknowledging, the negative implications, but also painting a picture of the opportunities and helping to enable that is really what drives strong bonds and entrusting relationships. As I can tell you, much of my business has been based on just being blunt and honest with individuals and giving them the information they need to either level themselves up, find a new career opportunity, but set them up for success as well. So that's by putting ourselves in others' shoes and really acknowledging that we enrich that personal bond, but we set that person up as well for future success.
I really appreciate that. Yes, because empathy, as we know, is one of the most. It helps us stay on the team. We understand the North Star. Everyone can really understand that. Yes, I may not get my way 100%, but I know that the quote leader or the person that's on the team does have my best interest at heart. So, Unfortunately, Jack P. Flaherty, our time is up. You and I could literally ping pong back and forth about all this information. If my viewers and listeners want to find out more information about you and to learn more about the Decision Switch, where will they find all this information online?
Absolutely. Come to my website, thedecisionswitch.com, or you can email me at jack@thedecisionswitch.com. And love to hear from you and have future discussions, but wish nothing but success for your audience and the decisions and the success that they achieve.
I appreciate that. My viewers and listeners also know that if they can't find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmiller.lifeology.com. I'll link you with Jack P. Flaherty and the Decision Switch. Thank you once again, Jack.
Thank you very much for having me.